Hi, everyone, and welcome to Milestone 2 of the Data and Research Methods Project, organized by the National Student Data Corps. My name is Lauren, and I am a part of the NSDC project team. In this video, I'm going to walk you through milestone number 2, which is found in document A of your project packet. You can follow along with me as we read through milestone 2. As it says right here, the finding and sourcing quality data milestone should take you about 3 hours to complete. So now that we've done our desk research, we can start looking for data that we can analyze ourselves. As you know, a good data set is essential to any research project, and this will help us achieve high accuracy in our report on remote work for Mayor Elation. I want to note here that the DRM project provides you with a quality data set in document B. All we're going to be doing here in this milestone is exploring other ways to find data for future research projects. So we're going to learn about data sourcing together today. And as always, we have here linked a demo video. That's the video that we're watching right now, which will provide you with an intro to this milestone. We actually provide demo videos and mini lessons in all of our milestones going forward. So if you have any questions, just keep an eye out for this image right here. But first, let's talk about data sourcing, which is a really important part of the research project. We can find data in a few different ways. Two common methods that I've listed here include an internet search and also library research. The advantages of the first option, an internet search, is that it's fast and it's easy. However, it's obviously not always reliable or accurate. I've given here a few links to some free data sets that you can use for future research projects. So that's one option, right? Internet search. The other option is library research. It is less common these days, but it's also, I would say, very underrated. This is a useful resource for you. There are materials available to you at your local library to find answers for specific research questions, and this can also be done with help from university librarians as well. Again, I've shared some useful resources here on data consultation programs. This is, for example, something that's available to students through our parent organization, Columbia University. I'm sure there's something similar at your school. Regardless, I also highly recommend taking a look at data that's available to you through government agencies, including the Library of Congress. So again, it's important that we think about these other forms of data sourcing. Another option that's always out there and something that you might be familiar with, and even in sort of like a tangential way, is your own data collection. That's a complicated process, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So now that we know a little bit about data sourcing, we want to think about data vetting. As you know, not all data is created equal. We want to be really careful where our data comes from. We also know that our data has to come from a legitimate and trustworthy source. And I've provided here a resource and a link on how you can make sure that the data that you're looking at is reliable. When you are examining a data set for the first time, we should always ask ourselves the following questions. First of all, are the data set's sources clearly documented? When you're looking at the data set's collaborators, do you see any conflicts of interest? Maybe somebody has a reason to find a particular finding. Third, we want to ask, who is funding this research? Is this the US government? Is it companies who maybe have an interest in the research showing a specific result? So again, that would be a conflict of interest. Is it an academic organization? So who is doing the research can sometimes give you a hint as to the quality. Then we'd want to ask, where does the data come from? Is this a survey? Is it a scientific measurement? Is it an AI-generated algorithm-based data set? Depending on how much we trust each of those data sources itself, right? We may decide yes or no if this is a trustworthy set. And finally, another good litmus test, so to speak, is whether other reputable data sources cite this information. If other people think it's quality, that may help you out as well, okay? So now we want to think about knowing those kinds of key questions to ask yourself. There are some ways to identify, quote, bad data. So bad data is anything that's incomplete, unstructured, outdated, inconsistent. I strongly encourage you to read some of the resources, the links that we've provided here that explain specifically what each of those terms mean. On the flip side to bad data is that you should know that sometimes bad data can actually be fixed. So we can structure data, we can make it consistent, for example, but our goal really is to have good data to begin with. Anytime that we touch data or manipulate it in some way, there's always a risk of human error, and we don't want to hurt our analysis's accuracy and validity. So what we're going to do at the beginning, right, is check for bad data. And we're going to do this by starting to read through the data documentation. Data documentation is like a very broad term for any information that the owners of the data set give us at the beginning. In the data set, in the data documentation, we should always make sure that the following materials are discussed, okay? And that I've given you a list here of what to look for. First, you're going to take a look at the sample size or the population sample. This is really important because we want to make sure that the data set is large enough that it's representative of a given population. So for example, a sample set of one person, that's not really data. Even a sample set of 10 is probably not much to work with if we're trying to extrapolate information about larger values or goals. In particular, small sample sizes can actually lead to something that's called overfitting in machine learning, and I'm giving you another resource if that's something that you're particularly interested in. The next thing to look out for is survey length. If our research topic is defined by long periods of time, so if you're measuring an economic recession, if you want to know about children's educational development over a series of years, the study that you look at also is going to need to cover periods of time. How much time you will have to decide based on your research question, right? Then we're going to look at survey variables. So specifically, what does this survey claim to measure? Is that variable measurable as well, either directly or indirectly? And so the example that I often give is from the World Happiness Report. This group does an annual review of global citizens' happiness rates. As you can imagine, happiness is a very relative and subjective measurement. So the way that they come together with a single analysis of happiness is they break down this question into several different metrics, and that includes self-reported emotional satisfaction, right? In addition to other variables more easily measured by scientists, and that would include like GDP, levels of corruption, legal freedoms. That composite measurement is what the researchers are calling happiness, right? So when we're thinking about the variables of a given data set, right, we want to make sure that they make sense. Is this measurable directly or indirectly? And if it is indirect, do we think that that measurement is a good proxy for what we're actually trying to get to? Then there's the question of survey scope. So a data set might be very interesting, but it might not be relevant to our research. So for example, a well-structured data set on remote workers' favorite colors might be really interesting, and strictly it's within the scope of our work on remote employees for the city of Data Lake. However, it's not very likely that this is going to yield a useful recommendation for mayor elation, right? So scope is important. Next, we have data documentation. So is the data documentation helpful? Is it clearly written? Is the source of the data neatly outlined? Do we know where it came from? Is the data well structured enough that we can work with it? If not only is it a problem for us, it raises questions about how trustworthy we think that the authors of this study are. They should be very forthcoming in their data documentation about all of these materials. If they're not, I don't know. Next, we want to think about the date of the data. So depending on what you're researching, you don't really want to work with data that's more than just a few years old. Generally speaking, the more recent the data, the better. Depending on what you're studying, certain industries are going to be really up to date, are going to have new information that's as of like last week. Other industries is going to be harder. And so you just want to be aware of kind of like what your topic is and how frequently you can expect new data in that subject area. So just be thoughtful. Finally, we have data sources. So like data documentation, we want to know who published and collected the data. Do we trust them to have done this well? So for example, data sourced from the US Census Bureau is probably very reliable. We can imagine that work data which is collected from remote work is the best work.com. It's probably really biased, right? It may not have collected this information with the most rigorous scientific approach. Okay, so with all this information in mind, and I know I've thrown a lot of material at you at once, I want you to take a look at task number 3. So in task 3, we see that Khalid, who is a data engineer for the city of Data Lake, is giving us the below data sets. He's asking us to consider one of the following data sets for our in-depth research on remote work. So using the information that we just learned about data vetting, review this list and identify in here some potential advantages and disadvantages of each data set. For each one that you think should be set aside, note why it's not a good data set. And so your job is to now fill in the boxes that ask for an advantage and disadvantage, review each link, write down one for each given the criteria that we've noted above. So I'm going to pause this video, come back here when you're done evaluating our data sets. See you in a bit. All right, great work, everyone. You should now be done with milestone 2. Next time, we're going to get into milestone number 3, which is going to focus more on data documentation and identifying some of the biases that we're going to see in most data sets. As usual, we'll have a video to walk you through that milestone as well. So take care, take a bit of a break, come back for milestone number 3, and we'll see you soon.